Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming back. Hope you enjoyed the first two volumes of my 3.5 hour interview with Jeff Galewood. I know it seems like a lot, but hey, we just kept the camera rolling and talking and hitting really key points the entire time. So sit back, relax, listen. I hope you enjoy it. I think we start off with who Jeff is talking about is really doing it right in the game. So be prepared for another 45 minutes of fun, and then we'll go ahead and release these two back to back. So you'll get this 45 minutes and then the last 45 minutes. So relax, have a good time.
But a recent breed that popped up, I liked Borneo Exotics. I think he's a smaller breeder, and his stuff was really cool. And then over in Europe, I've seen some very nice lines of just white and yellow combos that are very refined, that are very consistent. So the funny thing is, I tend to start liking projects with leopard geckos that seem to be almost in other countries. And I think the reason for that is because like in the late 2000s, early 2000s, and like up until like 2013, almost all my highest end nice leopard geckos my dad and I were making would always get sold over to like Europe. Mm-hmm. They were the people that are more likely, well, I'll give you $2,000 for that. And they were buying a lot. And I even thought, like, one day I was like, a lot of these breeders in some of them in China, Korea, and then Europe are probably going to have some of the best looking stuff because they're only buying the best looking stuff. While a lot of other smaller breeders in the U.S. are
anything they find at a show.
I found that there's a more willingness to spend a high dollar amount overseas for a particular thing, while over here sometimes it's more about
you're spending $150 on shipping. So, the funny thing is somehow, luckily, and again, it's because this hobby, a lot of the really big up name people right now are super amazing and want to talk about their stuff. But I started talking to Jay at Eco Gecko, and he's doing Black Knights and everybody. Of course, he's got 40 billion followers, but he's 22 and he's a super great guy. He'll talk to you about anything. He'll send you pictures of his butt. Like him and George, a friend of his that does elite geckos, they invited me into a Europe WhatsApp group. So I'm in there with Dave from DC Geckos, a whole bunch of the really good breeders. And you're right, like they've taken a lot of things from here, and it's harder for them, especially right now with COVID and with Brexit. They can't just ship to each other even. And so it's so easy for us to get stuff right now, but they have had to really work hard at refining, and everything they get has got to be worth it, because they have to, they're talking about meeting at Ham and putting all of their resources together to ship to America or vice versa from America in. So yeah, when they pull the trigger, they have to get a bunch of really good ones, or it's a waste of money. And they are putting out amazing stuff. DC Geckos is his Sunfire line. I've got some Sunfire bells that I couldn't live without. They're just gorgeous. They're so beautiful, and yeah. I'm lucky that I was able to get some that are directly from him.
I'm going to actually look somebody up because I don't know his name. But I was, let me look. I liked his stuff a lot. I don't want to say it incorrectly because I know I'll butcher it really bad.
No, I'm terrible with names. But yeah, so I've been really, while you're looking that up, I've been really lucky I have a lot, and they're going to love this when they watch it. I have a lot of people that have been following my stuff that are in Europe, and they're just amazing people. And it's been really interesting to learn from both sides. It's here in America, it's blowing up, but them, they don't have but so many. And even with doing lives and YouTube, there it's kind of frowned upon, but they're starting to break out of that and not be as worried. George at Elite Geckos doing tons of lives. I've done some with him for about an hour that were just awesome, just to get there and sit there and talk, and they're just super passionate about everything they do.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's definitely fun to talk to people like that. This guy, he goes by Elko Schote. Elko it's EELCO. He has those reduced tubercle leopard geckos that appears to be recessive. And he calls them satin.
I think I've seen that.
But again, like it's every time I see like these really good European breeders with leopard geckos, their stuff is a lot more precise and defined. I see some pretty refined stuff over here, and but over there I see it kind of across some like unique projects, that aren't as popular over here, and they do some pretty interesting things. And what that kind of equates to me is like, is a lot of times they will find particular characteristics in something that can be line bred that are more overlooked and go towards that, which I'm a big fan of. That's what I've done a lot with leopard geckos and then even hognose snakes is kind of look for things that people are overlooking or underestimating and running with that particular.
Well, that bleeds into my next question of what morph is there that you've seen recently, like you're talking like that satin that you don't have that you might think about starting to work with, or that you've seen it recently and you said, hey, that's something I want to start thinking about?
Well, that's a good question, but also one I don't like answering because it's also saying, well, this is the big project I'm going to start on, and I'm going to work on it for about 4 or 5 years. So
okay, which one do you say that you've seen that you like and that you but you're not necessarily going to run out there and do it? You've just seen it. And you said like that satin.
Ilko guy, Ilko. I'm probably saying his name wrong, but the satins, those are very nice. That's actually, those have a potential to be, and that's like, the thing is, that one I can say though, because it's a very obvious one that people are going to want it. It's not going to be much of a secret that anybody with leopard geckos is going to want to work with that project. There might be, the only backlash I could see with a little bit is some people don't like scaleless morphs. And I can see why.
Those recently.
Yeah, but with those, I'm not seeing it as the same. It's just reduced tubercles. They're smoother. They're not losing any of their armored body qualities in captivity. It's not going to interfere with their quality of life whatsoever. But you always get people that'll, argue the point, or say something like, well, you can't know that for sure because you're not the animal. But it's nothing like
Is that an argument they make for, I see Brian Barczyk has a lot of those scaleless rat snakes, I believe. I'm assuming I might got that wrong. But is that what they say about those?
Well, yeah, I've seen people actually be definitely be against scaleless rats and scaleless corns. Now, I can see why you'd be against, like, say, silky bearded dragons. There's some definite, evidence that's logical that you can say, yeah, I could. There's at least an explanation why, hey, maybe those aren't the best of breed because they need a lot more care to get dehydrated pretty easily. You have to put ointment on them. A lot of people use the udder cream. Scaleless ball pythons. Well, I don't really want to, but that's a project that has a lot of downfall too. There's it negatively impacts the animals. Scaleless corn snakes, I got a couple at one point in a trade. I didn't really want them, but somebody wanted some hognose snakes from me, and they had a few, and they're like, and they had a few other corns. They're like, well, we trade these, and I'm like, well, no. And then they came back with a better offer, and I was like, well, I probably could resell them. And I was like, I don't, I've never had scaleless corns before. My dad actually had one. My dad actually bred corn snakes. I never really worked with corns much. So I took these on in a trade, and I raised them for, a few months. One I had for about a year, and I had like 3 of them. They would shed perfect. They don't have the protective layer of scales. So if they were to rub, they'd be more likely to maybe cause injury. They're probably more likely to get dehydrated, but basically those aren't really negatives. Basically just don't neglect your animals then. Like if somebody's going to point out the ethics or the issues of, say, a scaleless corn snake, it's like, well, you better have something that, is like, well, it makes it harder for this species to live, or it's but there isn't any evidence of that. And they have their belly scoots too. They shed perfectly. They, everything they do is fine. They breed okay. They don't have any issues with egg binding. They don't have any other outside issues. Like, again, they might have issues with shedding if you're not keeping them properly, but you're not supposed to be keeping your snakes improperly. So,
yeah.
I think any argument with the scaleless corn or scaleless rat kind of not really an argument at all. Just more of an emotional response by that person. Scaleless ball pythons, though, there's issues with them. A lot of people may talk about them, but I have heard of issues, and they're definitely one that if I would not breed them. If there was a scaleless hognose, especially if they're missing their rostral scale, they're not going to be able to have a quality of life, and they're going to do a lot of damage to their face because naturally they're going to want to dig. But if you had like a partially scaleless hognose, and they still had a lot of the main important scales around their facial structure, and then say their scales were reduced or even partially missing on their body, that is not going to affect the animal's quality of life. It is not anything that's going to negatively impact the animal. It just might irritate somebody that likes to be critical but doesn't like to do much critical thinking.
The funny thing I find about those type of people, it's usually the people that have no idea. They've never kept a snake. They've never kept a leopard gecko. I have a TikTok video, and you understand this because you've done this. When you have a baby, you have them in their tub, and you have to keep it moist. And so I went in, and I'm spraying, and the day before, I do my best to not spray them.
I know where this is going.
Yeah, he screamed. And so the next day, and it scared the hell out of me because, like, here I am. I'm new. This is my second baby. This is the first time this has happened. So the next day, I get ready and I'm filming it. And I did not purposely spray this gecko. I can't say it enough to maybe 10 out of 400,000 people. It's got 400,000 views. Maybe 3 people said, "Oh my God, I can't believe you sprayed it." I didn't spray. I sprayed the front. I sprayed the side, and they work their way around. Well, I did that, and he screamed. It's a natural reaction. It's a genetic reaction they have because they are completely defenseless, so that if something starts going into the hole that they're in, maybe it scares them to run away and go away. So, and I filmed it, and most people loved it, but the people, the 2, maybe 3 people out of 400,000, you could tell have obviously never kept or bred a leopard gecko because you would have known that's an absolutely natural thing. I can't believe you. No, I mean, you got to do it. If I don't spray, he's going to die. Would you rather me not spray? And so it's usually the people that have absolutely no clue that want to complain the most. They don't look into it first before trying to throw you under the bus.
Yeah, people. It's like a lot of times just people that want to be critical or just like complaining about stuff. I had somebody get mad at me because I held a cricket in front of a juvenile fat-tail gecko, and the fat-tail gecko grabbed the cricket by the head, and I kind of held the cricket there for probably not even a full second, so it could mash up the head pretty well. So then when it took the rest of the body, the cricket's just going to be kind of more incapacitated, and it'll just finish eating it. And they said that was basically abuse towards the cricket, and I did it for views, and I tortured the cricket, and there was a scientific study that actually showed insects don't feel pain more complex other organisms. And so I'm like,
the same ones kill cockroaches in their kitchen every weekend. But the problem of what you did is if you'd have done it with a black knight, you'd have got 40 billion views. Just LJ.
Yeah, well, it was crazy. Because I even went back and looked at it, and I'm like, geez, I was like, did I hold the cricket there? I'm like, no. I'm like, well, no. I just held the cricket on tongs, and it grabbed it by the head. I let it chew on the head 2-3 times, climb it. And then, because the gecko was kind of shaking it. A lot of times they'll grab a bigger prey item. Sometimes they'll shake it a little bit, and so I was holding on to it, so it got it pretty good, and then I let it go, and that was it. But I've seen it before. I've seen some guy, he pet a stingray, came up and fed it, I think a piece of fish, and fed it. It was in this very large aquarium setup. And one of the comments was I really hate seeing animals like this in captivity. You really shouldn't be keeping this stuff. And so just out of curiosity, I clicked on their profile, and it was great because I was only on there for a few seconds, and, it was just filled with irony and hypocrisy. Their first 2 posts were them cooking and preparing chicken, And it's well, and the conditions chickens a lot of times are kept in. It's well, is that okay? Oh, because you're eating it's okay. But a stingray in a big enclosure being well taken care of, you're against that. But an animal being abused, as long as you're eating it, that's fine then. Okay.
Yeah. it's there are people out there that are just they're angry, and they're just angry and don't know why they're angry. And the only way they can feel a little bit better is if they can make somebody else angry.
Yeah, putting other people down. They're like, oh, this is cute. I'm going to tell you why this isn't nice and cute. Everything's bad. I've seen it with like cat videos too. It's become a big thing where somebody tickles a cat with like a piece of grass. Like, well, you didn't have to do that, and that bothered the cat. So technically, this is now animal abuse. And it's like, wow, it's like things are getting pretty extreme.
It is. And and again, that person, in my opinion, has every bit the right to think that way. If you don't like it, think it. That's fine. But don't think that means that I have to think that way. Don't think that means, now if it's a legitimate thing, if I am poking a baby with a knife, that's a different story. But you might not be right. You might not be. None of us are ever going to be on the exact same level all the time. So, yes, feel that way. By all means, walk away. Don't look at this. Don't pay attention. But it's because the bad thing is, I see their side. They're coming from. Again, sometimes they're just a bad day. It's coming from a decent place. I'd like to think, because I like to think that not everybody's evil and just wants to hurt other people with their comments. So I can understand it and I can get it. And you, by all means, it's a valid opinion to you, but you don't have to put down everybody else or hate them or want to cancel or make them lose their job for years because of it. I mean, it's like it's gotten out of hand. And that's why I try to be as honest with what I say as possible and hope that because I reciprocate what other people think, that they would do the same with me. But there's going to come a time when I catch flack now. Like I'm sure you have experienced creating lines. I'm not even creating lines. I've just bought lines that I thought were unique. When I went with Supergiants, I went with Bell because I thought Bell Supergiants were prettier than Trimper Supergiants. Now that's changing, and it's there's more people putting out Trimpers. I have some now that are gorgeous. But when I started 8 months ago, I saw Bells, but now I catch so much flack from people that are like, "Oh no, there's no way somebody put in that much work with the Bells to make sure that they were separated from Trimper and their jeans." But like you have said, you don't even think it's that much. It's not a gene. It's just your line breeding large to large. So
yeah, well, but you have like some giant lineage that well, here's the thing. If somebody came up with, say, some big leopard geckos that are completely separate and they were laying bigger eggs and they're like, hey, these things get a lot longer, they have structurally, they're larger, that could be their own line of giants. That one's been a bit controversial, and it really shouldn't be. But, that happens with a lot of stuff.
Well, it's because you're going against what Trimper says. I mean,
well,
I haven't been in here long enough to say Trimper is 100% the end all. That's it. But if you read his books and you read his page, he says, "Hey, Supergiant is a gene. It's passable. It's blah blah blah." But I mean, that's why it's controversial because he said it.
But he's changed it twice. He went from originally, I think he says saying it was recessive to codominant, then back to recessive. I don't remember exactly how it went, but he definitely did change it 2 different times. And if you actually read his original book, he'll even say one of the tall tale signs of polygenetics is an uncertainty and confusion with something being saying dominant, codominant, for example. It's actually really supposed to be incomplete dominant, but that was a term most people used, still do because it's easier. It is and it isn't. I mean, I don't want to get into it. It's actually incomplete dominant is correct, and then saying recessive. So saying dominant, incomplete dominant, and recessive, if you have a trait that is kind of a characteristic and it kind of reminds you of both, and and it keeps giving you like different results, not so much different results, but it's kind of putting you through a little bit of loop, like, hey, it almost acts recessive. Oh, this is almost seeming dominant or incomplete dominant. That's a tall tale sign of a polygenetic trait. And the thing is, leopard geckos are king of polygenetics. I mean, almost everything we work with is polygenetics, and they're actually the most celebrated and the most consistently, like the best stuff that's like been on the market as far as like, quality and line. It's all line bred traits, like black knights, really nice bloods. All of your high tier stuff that like most people, like anybody's working on, is all line bred stuff. because you can continually improve on it. And, you can take, like, say, like an Emerine and line breed it to look a specific way. And if you do a good enough job, or if it looks crazy enough 15 years down the road, and say you have one that has awesome emerald green, like perfect reverse stripe all through the body, and, like, say, red-orange sides, and has really unusual pattern, it's kind of like koi carp. Koi carp, that's all polygenetics. And there's koi carp that go for like $80,000. Actually, there's ones that go for more because they have the colors in the right precise areas. There's a lot of intensive line breeding going into koi, and I think that dates back to like hundreds of years ago. And that's all through selectively line breeding. So a lot of times, I told you this before, as we're talking, like, a lot of times people almost like respond to certain things being, presented to them, hey, this may be polygenetic, and they take it as like derogatory. Like, no.
Because it's easier. It's easier if it's not polygenic. Polygenic says this is going to take time. This is going to take money. This is going to take. Well, instead of buying a really big gecko and then going and finding hopefully a really big female and then putting them and then taking the bigger and it's so much easier to go, hey, I'm going to buy this has the gene of supergiant and this has the gene, so baby should always be supergiant. It's easier. I think that's what the pushback is. That goes to my people fight you because it's what they really want. Like, and I'm one of those. I can't deny that a little bit in me says, man, I really wish it was a gene, because that would be super simple. Because then no matter what size, because females aren't as big, so and especially if you get one that was started to be bred before time, she didn't get to grow as much. She could be stunted. It's really hopeful to say, hey, well, look, I'll take this really big gecko male and I'll breed it to this female that's nowhere near as she's 85 grams, maybe 90, if that, and I'll get huge babies. It's easier. It's a lot harder and a lot more money and time to have to line breed something.
Yeah, the pros of it are there's a lot more you can do is when you're line breeding. But you can always say that too about a recessive. Like, say a Tremper albino's recessive. Well, that's the end all. But the fun part is all the polygenics and all the line breds you can put into it afterwards. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, if you have, say, like two supergiants that come from lines that produce these very big ones and they have the supergiant qualities, you breed them together, yeah, most of the babies are going to be probably of the supergiant qualities because that's what they were line bred to be. It's kind of like if you have two really, really nice bloods, you breed two of your like best bloods together, all the babies are going to be very nice bloods. And you could even do it with and that again, it goes like if you look at like dog breeds are pretty phenomenal about how quickly they've actually done certain dog breeds and how true those characteristics run. And that was all done through polygenetics and selectively breeding them to get them to look that way, whether it be a Chihuahua or a Great Dane.
That's because dogs are one of the few animals that it only takes two breeding cycles to get a gene to stick. It's very rare. It's one of the things in eugenics when I was reading about eugenics. Dogs are one of the few animals that's why it was so unbelievable and it goes back to my love of genes that every dog came from the wolf.
Yeah.
And now you have Shih Tzus. Like, it's sad, but now you have Shih Tzus. So it's unbelievable.
It is. And it's an evolutionary thing with dogs that make them being able to their genetics to quickly change that fast through selectively breeding. And that's the thing, that's how it's different in all organisms, So certain ones, it's going to be more applicable. And then it's kind of like pigs. You can have a domestic pig that's, hundreds of years, generations of, domestic, lineage. And then if they're released into the wild, they actually become feral and they'll actually grow coarse hair and they'll even grow tusks. And those genes that were line bred to be turned off actually activate from their presence in the wild. So yeah, you have these dogs and wolves and pigs. They're a lot more complex organisms opposed to reptiles. But if you look at like reptiles, the really interesting thing about reptiles is look at all the color variations, genetic traits versus any other species. There's no other, like outside the family of reptiles, you're not seeing any other species with such a broad range. I mean, maybe fish is like a close second, but you're not seeing a lot of recessives or incomplete dominants, all selectively line bred. You see some genes in dogs and stuff, like even like T-positive albinos, and but you're not really seeing the genetic diversity you see in, like, say, like ball pythons, for example. Look how many morph mutations there are. But if you go to birds and stuff, there's you'll be lucky to see a few more than say something that's like a piebald albino, leucistic, or another kind of like standard like type of like traits that exist, because like there's a lot of traits in reptiles that aren't described by science, like lavender, like corn snakes and lavender hognose. That's the exact same trait in different species, and it's also appeared in false water cobras. That is not a trait that is observed in species outside of reptiles. And so reptiles, that's the one thing with them genetically that's made that whole keeping a hobby fun, is the genetic diversity that you can find in a lot of species. There's certain species that don't, though. There's a lot of that are like unicolor. I think if you go out and you like found like say like a rufous beaked snake, they're not going to produce a lot of genetic like mutations.
It's so much easier when you want to work with that than it is dogs. When I was growing up, my father bred dogs, and it's tough. It's like, you talk about the hard work when it comes to that, and then you could get stuck with 3 or 4 puppies every time. If that reptiles are so much easier for me to get into, because especially, I don't know anything about I know it's, from what you said, it's hard to get them to start as a baby, but the leopard geckos are simple. Like,
very simple, right?
Yeah, and I can only say that because being new, I've thrust myself into this. If you do it right and you follow and you study and you learn and you ask the right questions and you have the right people around to show you, it can be simple. It can have hard days. There's tough days. Breeding, it's tough. When you get your hopes up and you get your dreams into it, and then there's no fertility, or you get a male that just won't work. There's frustrating times, but it's simple compared to the way it could be. So, we'll keep moving on. Next question I have for you is, we've talked about black knights. We're not going to talk about anything specific because it's been done to death with black knights itself. They're beautiful. But do you see there ever being or anytime soon, a new wave of morph that hits like the black knight? Like, ever since I've walked in, it's all that anybody is striving for. It's the most expensive, well, besides a cipher, the most expensive morph that you can try to get to get close to perfect. You're never going to get close to perfect unless you're, again, Jay at Eco Gecko. He lucked into a bunch of really perfect and has created a bunch of perfect, beautiful animals crossing to his snows that are almost completely black. And it's something that a lot of people pray and hope for and spend a lot of money hoping that their babies are going to be the next big, great thing. And I didn't want to jump. I'm not a bandwagon person. I didn't want to jump onto that wave until I got one. And I got my first one from you. And I was just like, in person, it's like, and I got into it for the colors. I got into it but when you look at a pure black knight that's black, it's different. And then again, even when it's lighter, it's still different. It's that rusty golden hue that I still like, but again, it's not as popular as full black, but it's gorgeous and it's nice to have. But do you feel like there is at some point going to be something that hits to this kind of level? Well,
that Echo Salt guy, but it's that's a hard comparison. I think his will be, but that's a recessive. This is a line bred. Black Knight is, in my opinion, the most impressive line bred trait to ever exist, because it looks like an actual morph, like an actual gene mutation that isn't polygenetic. It looks like something that looks like a these look like they are melanistic animals. Mm-hmm. And I mean, they were around for a while. I think it took that guy around a decade. I think Ferry was the original.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he, I know he had brought some to, I think, ham shows, or maybe it was the one show in the UK. I can't remember. But before he even released them, he'd show them to people. And he had some that were like all black. And it was around the time of like the black velvets and black pearls. And so I had heard of them. And my one friend was actually like, no, I see them in prison duty. He goes, these are all black. He goes, yeah, like a couple of them. He goes, he wasn't selling them though. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. I was like, we got these other dark line bred traits. And I was like, they're not the most consistent. So I wasn't really impressed by hearing that. Then when they came out and then seeing what they actually were, because that was a story I heard. I had not seen pictures and I was not there. But when I seen them in person, or even need to see them in person, just the photos and then working with them and breeding them and seeing how strong of a polygenetic it is, it's extremely impressive. I'm sure with enough time, there will be something else. I don't know if it'll be to this level, though.
What about a solid red gecko? Do you see us ever getting like some other color? Like you keep doing these really oranges to really orange, and these getting redder and redder and redder.
Red. The problem, though, like with that comparison, it's not a problem, but you will see the progress on the way there. And we've gotten some, like people have gotten some stuff that's pretty dark reddish orange, and some stuff that's pretty solid. So I still think that will actually be less impressive at the time versus the Black Knight coming out. Because when the Black Knight came out, any other melanistic stuff was inconsistent. None of them really maintained black into adulthood, and if it did, it was extremely rare, and there was still some visible pattern, and there is just maybe just a handful of them. And then when these came out, they're like, hey, this is jet black. Also, here's 20 more that look just like that. And if you breed them, you're going to get a high percentage of these. And then it does stuff to the body pattern, too, with the connecting. So it's much more than hyper-melanistic. It also distorts the banding a lot and makes it aberrant in a way that no other line bred trait does. So it has two things going on for it. One's kind of overlooked. The one that everybody focuses on, though, of course, it's melanistic.
Yeah, you're right. When I look at the patterns, like again on that female that I got from you, her patterns it's nuts. And people, it's so sad that that, like you said, he dropped like that, because people would be really freaking happy if they never got that black. If it was just the browns with the crazy pattern, people would still because that's something that you don't see on any of the other thing. Like people would be ecstatic. But because you can get it darker, now it's kind of pushed to the side. It's kind of, I really want black. No, man, you pay attention and look. Like this is an amazing guy. It's not like any other gecko out there. It's
a very impressive line bred, especially in the way it was released. Is like there wasn't anything like accidentally released that I know of or anybody else like beforehand, and then it was just came out, hey, these things are hypermelanistic and melanistic, and it was very exciting. And, they've maintained their price very well, I think. And that's the thing. That's the power of polygenetics and commanding, not so much just like money, but just desire. And then also the whole aspect of just, it shows people appreciate the morph, when people are like, so there's a high appreciation in the hobby for these kind of very strong line bred traits, and it makes sense with them because again it's the most even if you don't like an all black gecko, I mean, just everybody disagrees with me, but it's kind of hard to disagree that this is the most impressive polygenetic, especially people outside of leopard geckos see it and they're like, they can't believe that was done through line breeding. They think it's like a recessive, and other people like, it doesn't even look like a leopard gecko.
It's crazy. Like when I hold, especially the female I have is much darker, but even the male is pretty dark. It's almost, we're very similar to the one you're holding here, where it's, you can make out some pattern, especially right after shed, but it's still pretty dark, and it's completely different. And it's when you line breed like this, you're going to get, the body has changed, a little smaller in circumstances, but they're just, it's not the same. It's like you're like my brother knows nothing about leopard geckos. He just came and visited for the first time and showed him all of them, and then I showed him this one, and he's just like, man, that doesn't even look like the same species. Like and he was like just wowed by it. And that's somebody who's never seen geckos before, paid any attention to them. They just do that to you. They draw it. It's and it's made a lot of people a really good living right now, especially everybody who's jumped onto it. And that kind of leads into the next one, where it's been a huge surge of people coming into this hobby. Me being one of them. And you see it, and you look at Instagram and you see all these breeders and new breeders and new breeders. And I feel from what I've seen in the past year or two, it has to have doubled or tripled. Do you feel like this surge in the hobby, this jump of people into it is hurting the hobby, or is it, helping because it's getting the word out and it's giving more?
It helps. It helps. For market wise, temporarily, there's a surge in like demand. Sometimes these demands, though, seem like they'll taper off, and they think that immediately that's the peak. And it generally isn't. Usually tapers, and then it goes up again. It kind of like, goes like in a zigzag. There's more and more exposure for reptiles as far as a hobby, and then breeding and pets just in general. It's become extremely strong due to things like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. So it's exposed a lot more people to the idea of, being interested in getting into the hobby. Because, you hear a lot of people, too. I mean, this is pretty common, where I know somebody that has, say, a significant other or a friend that doesn't even really like reptiles. And they start being around them, the person that has reptiles, or they even start taking care of them. And that person, it's not very common, but that person ended up like years later, likes the reptiles probably more than the other person, or at least on par, and they're actually now owning a collection of them and breeding them, or just keeping them as pets. But there's a lot more respect, I think, out there, and understanding for snakes, especially because they're, of all the reptiles, they're the ones that are probably the most demonized. And there's a lot, and back when I was a kid, nobody knew what a hognose snake was. I'll go places. I'll even go like sometimes my bank or other places, and people are like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of hognose snakes," and that's through social media. Mm-hmm. So the larger community helps. There isn't like forever growth, although it's such a niche market. There is actually quite a bit of room for expansion, but there's always waves. There was a big wave in the late 90s, early 2000s. Then the wave continued because of the introduction of the internet. Leopard geckos, the huge wave hit in the mid 2000s because especially when Raptors and Eclipse came out, and Max Snows were out around the same exact time. The leopard geckos were actually they were bred over in Europe, but there was really nobody keeping them hardly over there. And there was a massive surge of breeders popping up over there wanting to work with them. And so around 2006 to 2009, I had frequent large orders, and sometimes my best orders and best customers were all in Europe. And I was going to the ham show myself once a year, and I'd go in September, my dad would go in March, and we'd actually vend. And we would also do pre-ordered deliveries. And that massive surgence, died down because they started breeding. And then, of course, there's a lot more leopard geckos over there. But for a short bit, there weren't a lot. And so when that hobby kind of triggered over there, they were like, there was hardly any decent leopard gecko breeders over there. There weren't hardly any morphs. So there was a lot of importation. And then there was also a big surge in the late 2000s following that in Hong Kong and China. And that, went pretty strong until, and it's still probably going strong, but not as strong, up until 2015, 16, actually 17. It's probably where it started to taper down. And then there's always been a demand in Korea, Japan, other countries, and then, even within the United States. And so you'll see these surges, and then these, will slow down, then spike somewhere else. So it's just, it goes in cycles.
I think COVID helped it a lot because, and I work in the pet food industry, and because of COVID, people were at home and people wanted a hobby or a pet or, something to do. So they started buying dogs. You couldn't go to the SPCA and adopt a dog, and our sales went through the roof for pet food. And so I think the same thing with this. It helped the pet
It's
trade.
really had an effect for sure.
Yeah, oh yeah, big time. I mean, and it's also hurt because you can't get anything right now. Like you go to PetSmart down the street, there's nothing there. You try to order super worms from anybody, they're on hold because they don't have any. It's great for me. I love that I was able to jump into this and have so many people around to talk to about it online. One thing I find it's like you get on Instagram and you have so many people fighting to find followers, but really they're fighting. They're getting each other. You get a group of the same people, and it's then you get the ones that they're purposely. You can tell they're purposely not including your content or talking about yours because they have a group and they don't want it starts to, you can see the bullying and the grouping and the soloing out of people. And I try not to, you need Instagram and you need all that, but I try to put more of, I want to make content like this, like what we're doing right now, because for one, I enjoy the hell out of talking to somebody because, I don't really have anybody else to talk to about this. So sitting here to talking to you about this is great. But when I put it online, hopefully somebody like me gets to watch it and get some real information, or, they get that spark of wanting to do it. So, in my opinion, there's good and bad both from it joining or jumping like it has in the past year or so. What do you feel is the best part of the hobby and the worst part of the hobby?
The best part of the hobby is the species, the animals. Worst part is if you ever have to deal with any diseases, that's a very tough one for people to learn. And that's something going into things too. Because I sold some people geckos and stuff, and they spend a lot of money. And they start frivolously buying geckos from everywhere. Like, hey, you should quarantine and be sick. And I make them aware. They're like, these can get sick? And I'm like, yeah, they can. Because pretty much anything can get sick. So I was like, you got to be careful of that. I mean, even like gardeners, look at all this stuff. Tomato plants and blights. Then there can also be other factors like insects and things like that. But so the positive is definitely the species. The positives can be people. And actually, people sometimes be the negative, especially when you get it's a small percentage, but you'll get those critical people. And it depends, too. For me, it doesn't really bother me. Sometimes they make for interesting arguments, and actually sometimes it's debates. If it's more of a debate, then I don't really mind it. And it's also you learn from it too, because you'll kind of get an idea of like what these kind of more critical people, what they're looking to try to pick apart. Yeah. And then you can try.
That's a discussion between rational people. You can't have it if it's not a rational person. That's when it's not a debate anymore. It becomes more of a, you're a monster. It's my opinion. You're wrong. That's where it gets crazy.
Yeah, but it could be. Say if they start doing that, like on your own Instagram page, generally you have other people that have a lot of experience too, and then they're gonna probably shut that person down as well because they're gonna see that person's being absurd. Everyone, people see that. A lot of people are, tired of people just, running their mouths and being absurd and talking about things that they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's happened a few times. And sometimes that's actually funny because I've actually seen people that it just blow up in their face. And I'm like, why would they even say that?
Yeah.
So the pros, definitely the species. There are some other negatives. It can be sometimes monotonous work, taxing. But you also have to do what you're comfortable with. If you have too much stuff, that can definitely become an issue. And so if you have your collection in comfortable size, especially if you have somebody that can help you, that definitely helps a lot.
To go with what you said about the disease and everything, like I've seen it just for me a little bit, what little group I've had up for sale, you get people that don't know, and they, again, I'm not in it for the money. I'm in it for, what I'm doing. And of course I don't have huge amount of space. So I'm going to eventually, the ones that I don't really need, I have to get somewhere, and I don't price the ones I have up very high, and you get people that they think a price in their mind, like, oh, $60 should be enough. And I try to tell them, that's fine. You can go buy a $60 gecko and hopefully you'll get a very good one, but you got to be careful, because going and buying a $60 gecko could lead you, if you're a good person, to thousands of dollars in vet bills. Like if you go to just PetSmart or anybody that'll just sell you a gecko for $60, there's a good chance that gecko is going to have problems. Not all the time. It could be unhealthy. And if you're a decent person and you see this and you take it to a vet and you care for it like you should, it's going to cost you a lot more money than if you went with a breeder who has done their due diligence, who can tell you everything about that gecko, who is moral and honest and breeds, knows what they're doing and can explain to you how. It'll save you so much more money in the long run. So I try to explain that to people. I know you have had to deal with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a conversation. If anybody ever messages me, it's actually a conversation I'm always willing to have. And I'll have these people like ask me questions and stuff, and they don't buy anything from me, and that's fine. But most of the time, I'm pretty happy as long as I have the time to answer the questions. I don't have all the time in the world, but I definitely and it's something I like talking about too.
All right, everybody, that's it for this section. We've got one more to go. Please come back, check it out. I believe you'll love it. Make sure you hit subscribe. Turn on your notifications so you can see when this comes. Let people know about it. If it's something that you found informative, let me know in the comments. Tell me what you liked, what you didn't like. It's an open forum. So, again, I really appreciate you. Those that helped me a lot, you know who you are. Until next time, I'll see you later.